You've heard me say before that you can absolutely turn your obstacles into opportunities, that you can turn your pain into power, that you can rewrite your script and take back control over your story. But the question is, when that chance really revealed itself to you, when you were really challenged and faced the opportunity to do this, could you do it? Well, luckily for you, that's exactly what we're going to talk about in today's episode. Welcome to the Storytelling Lab, where we break down the art and science of storytelling. My name is Rain Bennett. I am your host, and I'm a filmmaker and an author on a quest to understand how we can tell better stories so that we can do better work and make the world a better place. Each episode, I host one of the world's best storytellers to help you understand how to leverage storytelling to increase your sales, deepen your connections, and serve your audiences better. What's up, storytellers? Welcome back to the Storytelling Lab podcast. This is episode 184. Today, my guest is the phenomenal J.R. Martinez. Now, you may be familiar with JR's story. I was super excited to have him on the show. And if you aren't, I'll give you the short version of it. J.R. Martinez entered the military, into the Army in 2002 after September 11th, where many young men and women did because they felt this duty to their country. So he comes in feeling patriotic, feeling a responsibility, feeling like he's doing his duty. And sadly, like many of those veterans and those military members, it ended really terribly for him, where his Humvee got struck by a roadside bomb. 3 of the people in the Humvee were able to get out, and he was not, and he suffered major burns to his skin. He talks about that in somewhat detail. He tries to save you from the gory details, but enough to send shivers down your spine. But he makes it out alive, which is huge, but in a terrible position where he's having to spend months in recovery, finding out how he gets back to feeling like himself, much less operating like himself, especially when he doesn't even look like himself anymore. Like, how traumatic could this possibly be? You look at yourself in the mirror and your face isn't the same that it was. Could you do that and still see the you behind those eyes? Well, eventually he got there. And fast forward, he was able to turn that pain into a power, into an opportunity that allowed him to become a best-selling author, a keynote speaker, an actor. He made a career off of his story. Not to mention, he won season 13 of Dancing with the Stars. Like, you could stop my story right there. You could never tell me anything ever again. But he continued to grow. He continued to help people and find his community and find his audience and find his voice and use it as an agent of change for other people struggling with trauma like he was. Of course, he learned how to tell his story effectively throughout the process by going on shows like Oprah and Ellen. Of course, he understood how to tell his story by speaking publicly and writing his first book. But what he really learned, and why I'm so excited to bring you this episode, is he understood how to take this pain that he had to deal with. That's his inciting incident, right? And go through the challenges that it took to reframe that problem, that conflict that he now had to deal with. And the change happened here, in his mind, in his head, in his heart. He didn't go out and get some skill that he was able to overcome this obstacle with. It came from within. This is how any main character of any story overcomes the obstacle, a change from within. And he lived this, and he was able to turn this into a career. Now, you may not have been hit by a roadside bomb overseas at war, but you absolutely have a problem that you're trying to overcome. If you are trying to use your voice to help people, to build a community that you aim to help with, you can absolutely glean much more than inspiration from this story, which it is inspirational. You will glean strategy and strategic and tactical wisdom on how to do it. How do I remain authentic? How do I keep my sense of humor? How do I keep being me in a way that is helpful to folks when I might not feel like it? This is one of the most inspirational, motivational episodes I think I've ever had. What a gem of a person. I am so grateful that his team reached out to me and that he was on the show. and I don't want you to wait any longer. So here is my conversation with JR Martinez, and I hope that you love it. JR, welcome to the Storytelling Lab, my friend.
I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. I feel like this is going to be a great and easy conversation, which are hard to find these days.
That's fair. I take a lot of pride in that. And for those listening, we Jr. and I were chatting, and it was running away from us. 10 minutes had passed when we were just shooting the stuff a little bit. So I was like, well, hold on now. So, but that's a good sign. That's a good
Yeah,
sign. I think the conversation
100%.
will go great places. Now, I was really interested when your team reached out because so the show's called the Storytelling Lab. Primarily, we're talking to artists and entrepreneurs, people who have stories to tell. So my background's in documentary filmmaking, and I'm a writer. So a lot of the times it's visual storytelling. So we have marketers on, screenwriters, et cetera, et cetera. However, we always, almost always, come back to the story that you tell yourself. So whether you're a startup founder, whether you're a screenwriter or an artist, like it always comes back to the story here and here. And there's a presentation that I have often given. I've changed the names depending on the audience, but it is some version of turning your story around, turning your pain into power, obstacles into opportunities, all of that
hmm
type of stuff. And a lot of those popped up after the pandemic. So
hmm
that's one reason I was really excited to talk to you, because you've built this career, your whole life is based off of that concept. At least it seems so to me. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I will let you tell the story. But one thing that I say often when I'm helping people try to find their story or find stories to tell, one thing that I say is track back in your memory the point when you looked at yourself and you said, no more. And that is always a great place to start a story. And it doesn't just happen once in your life, right? So, my question to you is, in this journey that you've been on now for a while, can you identify a moment like that when you were just like, I can't do this anymore. Something's got to give. Something's got to change.
God, it's like how much time do we have? Because,
We got all the time in the world, baby.
to your point, I mean, it doesn't just happen once, right? And I think
Fair.
that's the thing that people. I refer to the day that I was injured as my rebirth. If you're familiar with the military community, especially those that have been wounded, they refer to it as their alive day. And cool, like that, rock with that, vibe with that. But it never really quite summarized or spoke to me to just call the day that I was injured my alive day. And so for me, I call it my rebirth. And the reason I call it my rebirth is because I truly believe that parts of me died on that day, which left room for other parts of me to be born. And since I started calling it my rebirth, I have had over the last 2 decades since that day experiences amongst myself, with other individuals, strangers, people I love and care about that are in my life on a daily basis where I've like, ooh, this is a rebirth moment. This is the moment where part of me, up until this very conversation, until this very moment, was what it was. Now I'm a completely different person leaving this conversation, leaving this experience. So the reason I say, like, how much time do we have is because I feel like I've had so many
Of course.
rebirths over the last 2 decades. And they all vary in what stage of life that I'm in. So it could be related to like as a parent, it could be related to like
Yeah.
as a husband, it could be related as an entrepreneur, it could be related as a storyteller. There's
Sure.
so many things.
Let me let
But
me let me be more
uh
specific then, if that's okay.
yeah,
Uh, so for this one, because what it seems like to me is you had this accident, and I don't know how long this period lasted, but I imagine, again, I'm not here to put words in your mouth. I imagine there was a point of challenge, frustration, maybe even self pity, right? I mean, even if that's a day of feeling like crap, like this happened to me. And at some point, because now we can forecast or look forward and see where you are now, and you've built this career, this amazing career, a lot of it using your story as its like fulcrum, as its foundation, we could say. So, was there a point when you were in recovery from that accident when you were like, I am going to make a change. I'm not going to let this define me.
for sure. So I think, and at the time, it wasn't so much me, I'm not going to let this define me. So this is like literally 3 months after I was injured,
Mhm.
and and I'm in this really rocky space and just kind of just coasting through life. And sorry, it wasn't 3 months. It was like 2 months after I was injured. So for 3 weeks I was in a medical induced coma, and then I come out of that medical induced coma, and then I'm kind of going through the recovery process. And then I come to terms with the extent of my injury. I come to terms with that I wasn't going to be allowed to stay in the army and do the thing that I felt like this was what I was going to do for the next 20 years of my life, which was to serve. And I fallen in love with that concept of service. And as you can imagine, I fell into this really dark space, right? Into where I had regret, I was resentful, I blamed everybody. I just kind of overwhelmed myself with the thought that I'm never going to be able to essentially live in this society with these scars that are so visible. And at the time, obviously, as you can imagine, time and a lot of surgery has helped me, my scars healed. And so the way I look now is very different than the way I looked, shortly after I was injured. And so I fell into this really negative space where I didn't want to talk to anybody. And I would tell people this, and it's just sort of the power of the mind when you talk about earlier when you said like what you tell yourself, right? And so, you know, any burn survivor will tell you that although if they recall the moment that the accident took place, that was painful, that was difficult. But every burn survivor will equally tell you what's more painful is when you go through the recovery process, and more specifically when they take you to the shower. Now, I'll spare those details. I think we all kind of have an imagination. We can essentially kind of paint that story in our head. So I would go through that routine like all burn survivors, and it would just, you could take the toughest SOB and put them in that situation, and trust me, it's going to rock them to their core. And I was no different. And then after I saw my phase, and after I was told that I couldn't stay in the army, I fell into this negative space, and I was just so bitter and angry. And I would go through that process, that daily routine of taking me to the shower, of doing wound care, of doing all the things. And guess what? The pain wasn't there. It didn't affect me anymore because my mindset was just being mad and angry that I wouldn't allow that to get the best of me. Like I was just so mad and I just wanted to show everybody that I was so pissed off about this
Mhm.
that it didn't affect me the same way. I didn't scream, I didn't yell, I didn't feel the pain the same way because in my mind I was like, I want people to know I'm so mad, and I am in a bad place mentally. And what really turned it around was just this is the first moment that I experienced was one day my mom came into my room and she asked me, a very simple question like how I slept the night before. And I said, what do you care? And listen, it wasn't intended to come across as being rude and disrespectful. It was just I was just in a bad place. And when something's under your skin, and the simplest comment can come across pretty snarky, and but you don't talk to your mom like
Right.
that. So
I was about to say.
you're like, I don't care how innocent what the intention was, you better check yourself.
Uh-huh.
And so my mom, listen, it essentially was the spark of a really intense conversation where my mom was like, listen, I don't know why this happened to you. I don't know why this happened to us. Like, we started this whole conversation where I just started telling my mom, like, look at me, like, what have I done? What have we done to deserve this? That's the way I viewed what I was going through at that period of my life. And my mom said, listen, all I'm asking you to do is three things. She's like, I don't know why this happened. I don't know what's going to come of this. All I'm asking you to do is three things. One, try to be that positive kid. Try to be that kid that was always bubbly, vibrant, good energy, joking. Try to have faith and try to believe that something good will come from this. That was it. And in that moment, my friend, like I decided, you know what? That's all I got. I got nothing else. Like I'm looking around and I'm looking at my body and I'm like, there's nothing else to sit here and hang my hat on. I might as well lean into that. And I leaned into it, and it was so fascinating let me tell you how powerful it was because it was all mental. And the next day, I remember waking up, and again, again, going to try to paint a picture here without making a
Mm.
listener have to pause and take a breath. But essentially, I would have to sleep on my back. And I'm not a back sleeper. I'm more of like a stomach and side guy. And
Mhm.
so I had to sleep on my back because of the scars. And I remember the next morning waking up and I'm trying to sit up and I can't. I'm feeling some resistance. And I just kind of like push through the resistance and I end up sitting up. And when I sit up, I turn around and look back at what was the thing that was preventing me from sitting up, and it was cartilage of my left ear that was on the pillow. And again, like I find it humorous, like at this stage of my life, like it was just like, yo, that's my ear. Like literally part of my ear is on the pillow. That's wild, right? And you would think that that would be such a pivotal trigger that would just rock me and send me 5 steps backwards. But instead, I just kind of said to myself, like, I'm going to try to be this positive person. I'm going to try to believe, something good is going to come from this. I'm going to try to have some faith. And so I was able to look at that and just kind of like laugh. And I got up and I went over to the mirror and I stood in front of the mirror and I looked at myself and I just laughed and I was like, yo, part of my ear is on the pillow. And the nurses came in and I was like, part of my ear is on the pillow. And they were standing there like looking at me like, is he about to have essentially like like what's gonna happen right now?
Right, right.
And I just started laughing. But it was just because in my mind I already kind of trained my mind, even in the few hours, just like I'm not gonna give the power to this situation and to these things that I can't control. I'm gonna try to lean into these 3 things and it's why the early stages of my recovery in my life, I was hopeful. Like everything revolved around hope. And I was just hoping things would improve, hoping things would get better, hoping there would be a positive outcome. And the more that I got into the world, the more that I started to look at certain scenarios and able to take something away from it, I slowly started to transition from being this hopeful person to being this optimistic person.
Mhm.
Because an optimistic person, in my opinion, is someone it's based off of facts, it's based off of real life experiences. Like I'm not hopeful in my life right now. When things aren't going my way, I'm optimistic because I'm like, I've seen the pattern, the way these things shake out. It's gonna be okay, but it starts with me, my mentality.
That's such a good distinction between hope and optimism. Optimism is rooted in facts. I really like that. And
Yeah.
we're already hitting these like life lessons of just it's kind of cliche, but it really always does come back to mindset, right? Like I remember when I was younger and I was trying to like find my way and I'd see listen to people who had had some success and I was like, well, when did it change for you? And people would always say like it was when I changed my mindset. And I was like, what? That
Yeah.
doesn't tell me anything. That doesn't help, But as you grow older and
Yeah.
wiser, you learn this. Like, yeah, no, that's actually it.
Yeah, no, 100%. And honestly, for me, I think one of the biggest things is I've have over the course of my career, a lot of what I've identified by myself has been in that stillness. So I'll tell you another little story. So I'm a story guy too. So you and
This is
I
the
could
storytelling
be
lab,
doing this
baby.
all day, man. Like I'm 41 years old and I already know how I'm gonna be when I'm 70 and 80. You know, when you come up to a 70 and 80-year-old
Yes,
and you're
buddy.
like, hey, can you tell me where that gas station is? And they're like, well, yeah, before I tell you, let
Yeah.
me tell you this story. That's gonna be
Also,
me.
also, you're a 41-year-old Gemini. I found out, and
Yes.
I'm a 42-year-old Gemini. So
Attaboy.
we're
What
on the
date?
same
What date?
wavelength. The 16th.
Okay, 14th. All right, cool.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we're like
baby.
good week. That's a good week.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And so needless to say, like, like I just love stories and and these stories just come from these really cool spaces of me just being curious and curious about other people, curious about myself. And so when I was injured, and I'll kind of like not try to like, skim off of some of this detail, but essentially like we can get back into it if you need to, if you want to. But the day that I was injured, I was driving a Humvee through a city called Karbala in Iraq when the front left tire ran over a roadside bump. There was 4 of us in the Humvee, 3 of them were thrown out. I was trapped inside. I was trapped inside of this Humvee for 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, I'm in and out of consciousness. And listen, again, not to be too graphic, but essentially I can see my body changing. And there over the course of these 5 minutes there was a few instances where I would just start to like get these heavy like just sighing deeping gasping for air because what I didn't know at the time is not only that I had the burns to the exterior, the biggest thing at the time that was threatening whether I was going to survive or not was the inhalation from the
Totally.
smoke.
Yeah.
So I had broken ribs, so if you've ever broken a rib you know it's hard to like get oxygen, and so here I
Yes.
am gasping for air, not realizing I'm doing more damage by inhaling all the smoke. So there would be these moments where my eyes would get really heavy. And all of us can connect with this because we've all done it late night. You're trying to watch a movie, you're trying to watch a show, you're trying to watch a game, you're trying to read something on your phone, and you're super tired and you're fighting, and your eyes are like, who's going to win the battle? And eventually the body does. And my eyes would close. Let me tell you what was really fascinating, Rain, during that period when my eyes would close. When my eyes would close, I swear to you, I felt no pain. I didn't hear the chaos that was going on around me outside of my Humvee. The only thing that I could literally hear and connect with, I could hear my breathing pattern,
Mm.
and and my thoughts. That was it. So I was connecting with myself. And I would have these thoughts, of course. I'm like, yeah, my life is gonna end. This is what's gonna, like, how my life is gonna end in this way at this age, etc. And then I would tell myself, which of course was probably like 3 seconds, but of course it felt like more. And I would tell myself, you have to open your eyes. If you keep your eyes closed, that's it, you're giving up. And you have to open your eyes. Somebody's going to come and pull you out of this Humvee. And I would open my eyes and I would continue to scream and yell because I felt the pain. And then I would see and hear the chaos going on around me in the Humvee. Now, for a very long time, the story that I would tell people was of that, of the pain that I experienced, of the fear that I experienced. And all those I understand, that's part of the story. It needs to be told. But the more time that I sat with myself and in stillness, whether that was me sitting down writing, and sometimes writing with sort of a soundtrack to that moment, whether it was a soundtrack of like a rock guy, rock music or something pretty heavy, and I'm just sort of just like letting it all just flow out of me emotionally, or whether it was something that was like classical and just more focus based, but it was just more like really thoughtful and what I was jotting down and really processing. Like there were all these different emotions, and I spent a lot of
Mm.
time journaling with a lot of music and a lot of variety of genres. Eventually, I got to the point where I reflected on those 5 minutes that I was in the Humvee, and the story I stopped telling was that of fear and of pain. The story I started to tell, that I leaned into, was that when things were overwhelming, how I controlled it is I just close my eyes and connect with my breath and my thoughts. And I still practice that to this day. Here we are 2 decades after, and I still listen. I'm married. I have 2 kids. I have, my daughter is playing select clubs, whatever, travel softball. Like she is in it. I'm the coach. Like
Yes.
I love it. It's intense. If you've ever coached that level, it is no shame. I started at rec. Rec ball is very different than travel ball, and it's a lot more that it is a corporation you are trying to keep afloat. And I got my job and I got all, and then I got me, just me. And so when all that becomes overwhelming, doesn't mean it's negative. It just means there's a lot going on in my life. Doesn't mean there's adversity and there's tragedy. It just means that there's a lot going on. You can feel overwhelmed. And I do feel overwhelmed. As much as I'm pretty tough and I can manage, I can take on a lot. Something has to give. And when I start to feel that, you know what I do? I find a little space in my office. I find a little space in my house when I'm like, hey babe, I'm gonna go pick up the kids. Guess what? I get to the school early. I pick up a coffee, maybe a nice coffee because I'm a coffee guy. I pick
Mm.
up a coffee that's gonna be, good for the soul, good for the heart, and I just sit there and I just close my eyes and I connect to my breath. And I connect to my thoughts. And then what I start to do is I start to focus on the things that are going my way. I start to focus on the things that do bring me peace and do bring me joy. And that gives me clarity to one, understand what I need to be spending more time doing. And it also gives me the clarity on some things that I do need to eliminate from my life. And in some cases, that also it requires people. And doesn't mean they're horrible people. It just means that where they are and where we are, we're just not aligned. And
Hmm.
so I just need to kind of do some cleaning as you would clean your email. Well, some of
Hmm.
us don't. My wife has like 47,000 emails. And I'm like, how is that even possible? And so for me, and listen, I do a lot of yoga now, and I tell you, like as somebody who's pretty intentional with the way I go about my day and what I try to do, when I first started going back to yoga, I remember the instructor would be like, "Okay, close your eyes, connect to your breath." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know this. I've done this before. This is my sweet spot." And she would say, "Okay, what's your intention?" for the next 60 minutes, what is your reasoning of being here? Why are you here? What is your goal? And it was funny because like at this period in my life, which was like 3 years, 2 years ago, I was so overwhelmed with so much in my life. And that was a good problem, but it was things were kind of spiraling out of control because it was almost like I couldn't get a grip on it.
Yeah.
I hadn't spent enough time doing that very thing. I got away from it. And suddenly I'm sitting there in this class amongst 20 people, and I'm kind of having a little mini panic attack inside because I'm like, I don't know what my intention is. What should my intention be? What is the word that I'm setting for myself? What is the phrase? What is the statement? What is the And I'm like, I got to get out of here because this is overwhelming. And so I started to like lean into that a little bit more, practicing that in safer spaces with myself to the point now when I go to yoga and I sit there like I'm like, I know my intention. This is my intention. And sometimes my intention is just simply being present and being here and just connecting to my breath. And it serves as a reset.
Speaking of intention, when you shifted your mindset to that hope and optimism, and you're like, these are the only things I can hang my hat on, at what point did that start to transform again into something with intention that you were trying to now build, or a mission that you were trying to pursue?
Yeah, great question. So literally 6 months after I was injured, I'm still kind of riding this hopeful wave. And one of the nurses asked me to visit a patient in the hospital. And
Hmm.
he just arrived. And so he essentially was where I was 6 months prior, like the
Right.
same mindset, everything,
Hmm.
going through the same discoveries, everything. And I was 20 years old, man. And I was like, no. And she was like, why not? And I was like, because I'm 20. Like, what am I gonna say? I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. Like, what can I offer to this individual? And she just kept insisting, insisting, insisting. And we had kind of had like when you spend this much time in the hospital, and I always tell people, and I just say this for anybody that's listening that works in the medical space, or I mean, first responders, obviously service members, but in the medical space as well, just thank you guys. Like as much as people have come to me over the years and said it takes a special individual to serve in the military, I think it equally takes a special individual to not only be a first responder but to equally work in that space in the medical field, in the hospital, to see what you see day in and day out, and yet still freaking show up and not just show up physically, but mentally and emotionally. Because let me tell you something, I trauma dumped on those nurses and those doctors and those poor respiratory therapists that came in, poor students that were training. I trauma dumped everything on them every time that they would walk into my room, and I would start to cry, and they were just like sitting there like, we don't know what to do. But the great thing about that dynamic is that they took what was supposed to be and typically is an uncomfortable place, which is the hospital, and helped turn it into a very special, memorable place that I truly have fond memories of. Aside from the recovery, aside from the surgeries and everything that I endured, I miss that time, the almost 3 years I spent in the hospital. I'm not even blowing smoke up. Like it's 100% that's how I genuinely feel because the people were so incredible. But because I had developed that already at this point, when she kept insisting, I was like, fine, I'll do it. And she's older than me. And so, it's kind of like your mom telling you, like, and I was like, God, I'll go clean my room. Okay. And I remember when I opened the door to this patient's room, it was the middle of the day and it was completely dark in the room.
Hmm.
And listen, there were no words that needed to be spoken. I
Right.
felt the energy. And all I wanted to do was just turn around and leave. I was like, I do not want to be in this room. Now, not to get too deep into it, but because there's always some sort of fork for me in these stories, what I later identified in doing a lot of that work with with the therapist, with myself, is I identified the reason why I was triggered so much standing in that doorway is because a lot of it was the way my youth was. My mom was somebody who always kind of had me walking on eggshells, if you will. And there's a great book if you ever, if somebody wants to, read a book and it's essentially kind of having people in your life that make you feel that way. And so that was a trigger for me. And so instead of actually running away, I leaned in. I walked up to this patient's bed. I introduced myself. I asked a couple of questions. This dude took the conversation from there and started talking. It was a 45-minute conversation. And I remember I was like, man, by the time I left, I was like, man, still in the dark, mind you. like still in the dark. And I said to him, I was like, man, I'm gonna come back tomorrow and check on you. He's like, you want me to bring you anything? And at that time, this was 2003, people were like, bring magazines and bring things like that. And I was like, you want me to bring anything? Like, no, 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 I'm good, man. Just a visit. That's what he said. I said, cool. And I started to walk out of the room and I opened the door and the door was halfway open and something caught my attention, Rain. And what caught my attention was I noticed there was light, like at my feet. There, I saw light, and it wasn't light from the exterior. And so it caught my attention that I turned around and looked back into the room. And what I noticed that he was out of his bed. He was opening the curtain to the window and he had already turned the light up above his bed. And so to me, again, you used the word cliche earlier. I know it's super cliche. I know, you're a filmmaker and this, and people will say that sounds like a perfect script. And it's like, well, guess what? Sometimes that's what life is. Like it is. Everything is sort of being written and panning out the way we just choose to kiss it up as a coincidence. But I'm a Southern boy. You're a Southern boy. In
Let's
the
go.
South, we call those God winks. They
Mm.
don't think there's no such thing as coincidences. And so I just, instead of just kind of dismissing that experience, I walked out of that room and I went to the head doctor of the burn ward. I said, sir, is it possible every day between my appointments for me to visit other patients? And he said, absolutely. And I was like, all right, cool. And that's what I started doing. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But what I realized that day, what I needed to do was just show up. And I thought I was just showing up for those other people that needed it, I was a little further down the road than they were at this time, that I could show them that, it's not, things will improve, things will get better. What I identified after visiting patients every single day, and I would do this till like 8, 8:30 at night. One night, after about 3 months, going back to my room, which was across the street from the hospital, I'm walking and I'm reflecting. And I think to myself, man, I got the thing back that I never thought I would have again. And that's the ability to serve. I'm serving. That's what I've been doing. That's service. Okay, it looks different. It's not wearing the same uniform, it's not in the same setting, if you would, but I'm still serving. And that was the thing that I fell in love with in the military that I thought was taken away from me. I would never be able to do again. Yet I realized through this that was a simple fact and data, because everything is data, right? Everything in our world is data, data driven, data driven, data driven, information, 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 in order for us to be able to understand how do we reach people, how do we do this better, how do we be more efficient, how do we sustain this. Well, guess what? We as individuals, we have to look at ourselves as brands equally and say, I'm equally collecting data. When I interact with people in my life, I'm collecting data. When I have these experiences, data. And so that was an early instance where I was like, oh, the data tells me that if I continue to lean in and show up, despite the emotional feelings I may have, initial feelings I may have, good things will come out. That's when it started to slowly pivot to, oh, I'm not just hopeful anymore. This actually works. Like, this actually works. And that's kind of been sort of the basis of everything that I've done over the last 20 years.
Mm, And that, my friend, is called an origin story. Uh, man, so many different places I could go there. I have a lot to say and a lot to ask, and we might have to just keep going for a few hours. Um,
I'm here, baby.
um, okay, the first thing that comes to mind is this is very stereotypically story as well.
Hmm.
There's always, if not one, multiple what they call mentors or gurus or guides. Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars, right? Gandalf in Lord
Hmm.
of the Rings. The mentor that comes along and helps the person through those challenges, right? It's a very
Yeah.
typical story element. So in a way, that one nurse who pushed you to talk to that other veteran was one of those people, and you can have multiple. My question is,
Hmm.
now that you're starting to see this difference that you're making, was there someone that stands out, and there may be multiple, that helped you launch that into a platform, into a thing, like a living, breathing thing, not just a passion and feel and serving, but to actually like bottle it up?
Yeah, so I think, that's a common question I get is like, how did you get into this space from a speaking standpoint, right? Which is consistently what I've been doing since my injuries. Like, how did you get into this?
And also
And
why?
yeah, and people are always asking me like, how did you get into this? And like, how would I get into this? And I said, well, it started for me when I was visiting patients. And I started to, in the mix of getting to know these individuals and their families, because their families would be there. And I would be privy to these conversations, very intimate conversations that were happening in these rooms when I would hear service members and their families talk about expenses. I mean, just the thing that was really an issue back then was you went from being a two income household to all of a sudden now the person that's there, the spouse, the mother, the father, they have to leave their job to come and be a caregiver. Well, now who's paying for those bills?
Right,
So
right,
those are real conversations. And so it just sparked sort of this interest in me, like we got to fix this. We got to lean in and do something about it. Well, then I got involved with a nonprofit, and I got involved with a nonprofit, and it was set up to assist service members. And I went to this meeting, and I went to the guys that were going to start this, and they were just sort of trying to collect data to understand what is the need. Is this something that's even necessary? And I said to them, I was like, listen, these are things that I'm witnessing here in the hospital. Whatever you do, I want to help you, whatever it is. And they were like, you should be a spokesman. And I was like, I don't know what that means, but I'll do it. And seriously, I'm like, literally, my life is like Forrest Gump. Like, sure, okay. And I just did it. And I started doing it. And I got a little bit of media training, and I would go on TV and do these live hits for, 3 to 5 minutes and talk about the need and the organization and plug people back to the organization, to the website. And then, guess what? They'd be like, "Hey, JR, we're gonna tell us about a patient." I'd be like, "Well, Rain right now is, I heard him over here. I'm talking about his spouse that she can't pay the mortgage, or the car payment. They're probably about like 5,000." And they were like, "Here, we're gonna send you a check." And I would go into the room and be like, "Hey, Rain, here's 5 G's, man. Like, you guys like take the next few months." And he was like, "Oh my God," right? And it was just like, "Man, this feels great." And so from that, I remember the PR, the public relations, one of them from the hospital for the Army, reached out to me and said, "Hey, we're getting requests for you to come and speak." And I was like, "Speak?" And they were like, "Yeah." And I was like, "What do you mean speak? Like a TV interview?" And they were like, "No, like give an actual speech." And I was like, "I don't want to do that." And they was like, "Why not?" And I was like, I can't talk for 15, 20 minutes. Clearly,
well,
that's not an
well,
issue.
well.
That's my wife. She was like, God, you don't never shut up.
Oh my god.
And I was like, nah, like I could do a 3 to 5 minute hit. I can't do it. They just kept insisting, because they saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. And at some point, like I did with that nurse, I just got to trust and lean in. And so I went, and what I did is I was asked to speak on the military base at a local luncheon. And I spoke and for about 10, 12 minutes maybe. And when I got off of the stage, man, all these people came up to me and said, "Man, we can relate to you." And I was like, "What?" And they were like, "How can you relate to me?" And I would go down a list of itemized things. Have you been through this? Have you experienced this? Have this, like a commercial for a medication? And they were like, "No, we haven't experienced that. No, we didn't go through that. No." And I'm like, "Well, how can you relate to me?" And what I connected with is that it wasn't the actual experience that people connected with, it was the emotion that I experienced as I went through it all that they can connect with. And that's what brings us all together. And so that was that public relations officer. Suddenly I was like, wait, I think I want to do this now. And so I started leaning in. There's multiple people, but I'm gonna quickly tell you, there's one guy named Leslie. I was on a plane. This was about 2004 now. I'm on a plane, spark up a conversation with this gentleman sitting next to me. He's asking me, about what happened and everything. And we're having a cool conversation. And he says to me, "Your story is your story, but what is your story?" And I'm 21 years old. I'm sitting there like, man, I just told you what my story was. Like, and I'm literally thinking to myself, like, this guy's not listening, or he's been drinking. I don't
He's not
know.
listening.
Like, and he kept, and literally the last thing he said to me when we got off of the plane and went our separate ways, he said, to me, he's like, "Don't forget, your story is your story, but what is your story?"
That's
And
so
I was
good.
like, all right, man. All right, cool. Safe travel. See you
You
later.
too, bud.
Yeah. Yeah. And I walked away, but it stayed with me.
Yeah.
All these years, it just stayed with me. And I would just kind of ask myself, what the hell that even means? What was he talking about? And it wasn't until years later, where it clicked. And for me, what that translated to was everybody has a story, but do we even know the story? We're so conditioned to just tell this is the story, but is that truly the only story or the actual story? And so I started to really spend a lot of time learning about myself and really understanding, oh, this is the depths of my story. It's not just surface. I was in the military, I was injured. No, there's all these layers to it. And so fast forward literally 2020. This was probably, like I said, 2004 when I talked to this man, maybe 2005. 2020, I'm in Atlanta airport and I'm going to my rental and I hear JR. And I turn around and I look at this man and I immediately looked at him and I pointed. I said, your story is your story, but what is your story? It was Leslie. And he was like, you remember that? I was like, dude, that has been the thing that has kind of been which like I operate from is always to kind of do that internal work to understand the depth and the layers. And so it was a really cool moment. And that was a really special thing that that man gave to me. The other thing, which was the overarching transformation moment, was my best friend Dan. This is 2000. At this point, I'm out of the hospital. I'm in the civilian sector, as we call civilian world, and I'm kind of navigating it, but it's really a struggle because I have a different mindset and ideology, like in a sense of where, like, accountability is a big thing for me, right? I People that procrastinate really trigger me, and so I was encountering, the military mindset is very different than the
Mm.
civilian mindset. And I was encountering a lot of people that'd be like, yeah, we're going to do this. And months would go by. And then when I would circle back, and then people get defensive. And I'm like, well, you told me. And I would, and it was, and I just felt like things weren't going in the direction that I wanted it to go in. I thought I was going to have a lot more opportunity, and it wasn't going that way. And I just became, honestly, man, to be just completely transparent with you and your listeners. And um, I was of age, I was drinking, I was reckless, I was angry. I just kind of went backwards. But yet I would put on a front in public as everything was good, but then there would be these things that would trigger me when I was by myself. And one day, my best friend, I was traveling with him and some other vets, and I kind of got into a scuffle, just kind of words with one of them, and with him actually. And we get back to the hotel, and this is like after going to dinner and having some drinks, and we get back to the hotel, and it's like 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and everyone's getting out of the car. I'm getting out of the car, going into the hotel, and then my best friend's still sitting in the driver's seat, and he tells me to sit in the passenger seat of the car. And he's like, dude, he's like, you've healed physically, but you haven't healed emotionally or mentally. And he said, man, you need to cry. And I was like, what? And he was like, you need to cry. And I was like, man, I don't need to cry. Now, mind you, my father wasn't in my life. My father left when I was 9 months old. I didn't have a male figure in my life to ever, to follow that model, any model, whether it was good or bad. Like I was, as my wife jokingly says, she's like, I don't remember who taught me how to ride a bike to my in-laws. And they're like, and then my wife is like, maybe the streets taught me. And it just feels like the streets were teaching me. I was witnessing behavior from peers, from the men in their lives, and that's what I would follow. And so here he is telling me to cry, to cry. And before you know it, man, I start crying. I don't even know why I'm crying. It's just, I mean, just emotions. And at the conclusion of that, let me tell you how powerful it was. So every time he and I would have a conversation leading up to this particular interaction, whether on the phone or in person, he would always end the conversation with, I love you. He would always tell me he loved me. And I was like, all right, bro. Like, like it's just, again, a man has never said, I love you. Like, so
Yeah.
I was just like, all right. Well, fast forward that night when I'm sitting there crying and I'm spilling all these things that are, bothering me, weighing on me and everything. I was the first one that looked at him and told him I love him.
Mm.
And and the moment to me was that this was the man that allowed me to be vulnerable and said it was okay for me to be vulnerable. There was no judgment, that I didn't feel odd for another man to actually say he loved me because
Yeah.
that was unconditional love, and it wasn't odd, and I felt safe enough to actually tell this individual that I loved him. That man is my best friend. He's the godfather to my children. He's Uncle Dan. He's like grandfather Dan. He's my boy Dan. He's like all of the above Dan. And honestly, since that conversation, my life started to turn. literally turned. And shortly after that, I got an email to audition to become an actor. Other opportunities started presenting themselves, and then sort of the rest is kind of history. And so what it reminded me of was that what I did a few months after I was injured with that patient, I just showed up. And what it reminded me of is that in that moment when I was somebody that was not in a good space, he just showed up. Even though it would have been easy just to kind of get out of the car and go into his hotel room and just like be like, that dude crazy. Like instead he leaned in. And I think that's what most of us more a lot of us need to do more of is when things feel uncomfortable, is to ask yourself the question, why does this feel uncomfortable to me? Like, why does this trigger me? Why does this bother me? And then once you sort of get to the root of that, then maybe let's get to the human connection and just say, maybe I just need to show up for this human being with no words, with no solutions, with no suggestions. Maybe just Rain's in a bad space. You know what, Rain? You want to go watch a movie, dog? Let's go watch a movie. Hey, Rain, I'm gonna come into your house, my man. Let's watch a movie. Let's watch that game together. Let's just grab something to eat, man. Like no solutions to anything. Just be a human being and just be there because at the end of the day, we all need another human being in connection. And that doesn't have to be physical. That can literally be mental, emotional, just being in the same space with each other. And so those are just really pivotal things that happened early in my recovery in my life that just really made me realize like, the importance of just being there, the importance of listening, the importance of staying curious, the importance of um, just sort of being a gateway, I guess, if you will,
Mhm.
like of just information that is being thrown at us. And the information's always being thrown at us, is whether we choose to receive it or not.
Hmm. That's a bar right there. And I love your line earlier about it's just data. It's data. It's constant data. And I think people don't view it that way enough. Like these are just learnings. This is just data. This is all just testing, right? And if you're getting
Hmm.
feedback, listen to it. Um,
Yep.
that was really powerful. I appreciate you sharing all those people that shaped you. Major shout out to Leslie, by the way. I love that line so much.
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of vulnerability, I was thinking earlier when you were talking about, you said trauma dumping on the nurses and stuff. I've talked to veterans and I've talked to people in the medical field, and there seems to be a very similar thread in those two institutions of not, historically speaking, maybe, hopefully this is changing, not being vulnerable, not sharing their story. In fact, being tight lipped about things they're vulnerable about. And I've heard
Yeah.
criticisms from within both of those institutions. So not my observations coming
Yep.
from within, but I do see it. Can you talk to me a little bit about the power in being vulnerable and sharing your story for those people that might need to hear it? These people who aren't able to share it, I think it has residual impact or kind of like corrosive impact over time when they're not able to let it out.
100%. You need an outlet, man. You need an outlet. And, and so I just want to say this, like, I think it's like anything in life is the minute that we hear something that we got to do, we start to get overwhelmed because we're putting almost the cart before the horse. So, for example, I know somebody in my life that is like, like I'm really passionate about, health and, just supplements and understanding all what's good for the body, et cetera, et cetera. And, people have been saying I should probably, be like a wellness coach and, whatever. And maybe I should start posting on social and, but what, like, but how do I do that? How do I make money doing that? How do I, and I'm like, you're overwhelming yourself, right? And so it's this like you just need to right now, you just need to start. What are you passionate about? What do you care about? What did you recently discover from a supplement standpoint that you feel is really good and healthy for X, Y, and Z? Just post a video you talking about it. That's it. Just let it be organic. It doesn't have to be this intense pressure of, I got to set up a corp. I got to look for brand deals. I got to have X amount of followers, so I can start making cash. Like it doesn't need to be that. So when I talk about vulnerability, people start to think, oh my God, I got to start coming on Rain's podcast and sharing all of these things. And that's not where it starts. That is not where it starts. And it literally needs to be where you're sitting down for some of us. Like for me, it was cool, like to sit down and write, right? not worry about grammar, not worry about punctuation, just let things flow out of me as they were in me in that moment. Whatever it was that I was feeling, again, all the emotions, whatever it was, get it out, right? And that was a safe space for me to be able to share things that I hate this, or I dislike that, or I'm not happy about this, or what, or I secretly I care about this and I love this, but I don't want to say it yet. And but to your point, like you're right. I mean, you're right. Unfortunately, in those industries, a lot of people are still conditioned because of the mindset. Like, right? And I understand it. When you're in the combat zone, even if you're in a first responder, like you're showing up to a call, you don't have time to process your emotions. You don't have time to sit here and sort of navigate. All you need to do, and what that person needs from you, is to do what you're trained to do, is to show up for them and try to save their life. And the same thing applies in the military. The minute you stop and you sit here and like, well, how do I feel about this in this firefight? You or somebody else dies.
Yeah.
And so we just get conditioned and trained that way. And so for me, I'm just sort of like, yes, there is a time and place to do it. It doesn't mean you, again, go out and start trauma dumping on people, right?
Mm.
That's not the healthy way to do it because not everybody is conditioned and is ready, emotionally ready to be able to take that information. And that's the other thing. There's so many layers to this. So what I had to, and I used to do this a lot. I used to trauma dump on people. Like I'd go out, 21, 22, I see a beautiful lady. I'm like, hey, I want to start talking to you. I start talking to her, maybe buy her a drink, and we're having good conversation. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking for this one person to fix all these things in my life. Things that this person had no connection to at all. Yet I'm dumping everything on this individual, putting this in incredible pressure. This girl's 21, 22 years old. She's like, what are you talking about? Like, nah, peace. And guess what? She was out. And now she leaves. And now I take it as, oh, there's someone else
Yep.
that just abandons me. There's someone else that just, and what I realized over time, I was like, no knock on, those people that I was having conversations with. One, that wasn't the right setting. And
Yeah.
two, that wasn't the right way to do it. And maybe three, maybe those people are not emotionally intelligent right now to be able to receive and process this, right? So there's a lot of things. And so what I started to learn how to do was like understand, oh, all right, look at the sort of the Rolodex of people I got in my circle. Okay, Rain is a dude I know that if I need to get deep and have a real conversation, I can call him. But if I want to clown and just kind of surface stuff, maybe I call my other boy. Or you know what? If I want to start sharing some stuff that, maybe I call this other person. So you start to kind of understand what strengths people have within your circle, and then you sort of lean into that. Going to one person, expecting them to do all of those things is only going to push people away
Yeah.
unless that person has done the work themselves and they're emotionally and mentally in the right space and spiritually too. And so listen, for me, I have found immense healing in my ability to be vulnerable. I think the one thing all of us want, we may say we don't want because we're hurting and it's easier to be isolated and because it's harder to potentially put ourselves in a public space with a bunch of other people. Um, we strive to have community. That's what all of us want is to have community. You in this podcast and the projects you do, it's for communities.
Thousand
It's
percent.
it's I mean, we want people to listen to this podcast, but all the 5 million podcasts that exist, they have a community that like social media influencers have a community. Like it's a community. We're all striving to be part of a community. The problem is that people need to understand this, that when you're not being vulnerable, you're shutting yourself off from connecting to your community. And you have to understand that just because you're vulnerable and you realize, oh, this community we didn't click, or this person we didn't click, that does not mean that you stop being vulnerable. Does not mean you all of a sudden abandon that. No, that means that you then pivot and you try to practice it in another setting because maybe this is your community of people. And so in the midst of leaning into vulnerability, I have found a huge community of people I don't even know. That do those people fix my problems? No, but it makes me feel like I'm not alone and I'm not navigating things by myself. And dude, I went on Dancing with the Stars and I was crying. Like I cried on Dance with the Stars when back then they had 20 million viewers, and then if you didn't watch it live, there was some sort of publications or something that was covering it, and me crying on national television was everywhere. And I was like, you know what? That's how I feel. And so I'm just going to let it be. And for some people, they don't rock with it, and that's okay. But for others, they do. And guess what? Those are the people that are still in my circle.
Hmm. Being your by the way, real quick tangent. You talked about just that writing exercise of not worrying about grammar and just dumping. That's almost like literally. There's an author, Julia Cameron, who has a book called The Artist's Way. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's influenced so
Mm-mm.
many writers around the world. And that process is almost exactly what you outlined, called morning pages. It's so many people.
Yeah.
It's three handwritten pages in the morning with no rules. It's not prose. It's not poetry. It's not screenplay. It's just right. It's a brain dump, just to get the ideas flowing and just to get the brain
Yeah.
working. And it's almost exactly what you described. So I love that you organically found your way to the same practice, because so many writers around the world subscribe to that practice. And you do
Yeah.
too. It might not be called the same thing.
Well, I'm gonna have to
Um,
look into that, but I'm
yeah.
going to share this. So, like, this is probably about 8 or 9 years ago. I on Christmas I wanted to do something, and I was like, man, I'm gonna go to the Shriners Hospital
Mhm.
and visit some kids and down here in Texas in Galveston. And so I call and I said, hey, can I bring anything? It's Christmas Day. Can I bring anything? They were like, honestly, the kids, we got gifts, we got a Santa coming. The kids got a lot, but a visit, that would be special. I said, what about the parents? What about moms, dads, grandparents? What about the people, the adults that are there with their little one? And they were like, well, no, we don't have anything for them. And I was like, all right, cool. I'll bring something for them. So I literally went to Target and I bought little journals with pens. And and so I went into these rooms and I found the adult and I said, here you go. I said, this is your outlet. For right now, this is your outlet. This is where you begin. What you fear you feel, the happiness based on progression you see with your little one, whatever emotion comes to you, this is where you put it for now. And then hopefully later that becomes a bigger project. But at the very least, it's part of your healing process and it's your escape. And people's faces were just sort of like startled, like, oh, to do that? Like, oh. And then people, like, when I explained it, people like, then the expression would pivot and they'd be like, oh, they'd be like this really soft smile and like warmness and embracing of that concept and that thought. And so, that's why I say, man, it's such a safe space to do it because you don't have no one's telling you to go in the middle of Times Square and sit down and write, right? No one's telling you to go in the middle of Times Square on a microphone and actually say what it is that you do it in your car, you do it in your room, you do it in your office, you do it in a safe space like that is comfortable to you. So, anyways, that's just sort of my, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look that up
Yeah,
now because I wasn't aware
Julia
of that.
Cameron, The Artist Way. You'll love it. I mean, it's a great practice for any of that, but that she calls it morning pages. Um, it, it's evident that you are pretty authentically yourself. And this is something, because you're talking about crying. Hey, that's just me. Took you a while to get there, right?
Yep, yep,
Shout out
yep.
to your friend who allowed
Yeah,
you to do that on
100%.
Dancing with the Stars eventually.
100%.
So you've got this part of you is very emotional and sentimental. You're also humor is clearly a part of you as a person, and also your brand. So where I'm going with this is there's a lot of people that try to make a career and a platform and a brand off of themselves and their story, especially if they've gone through something. But it doesn't even have to be that dramatic or traumatic.
Hmm.
The question is, how do you find, because you talk, your friend Leslie said that your story is your story, but what's your story? Also, it's similar, like finding your voice, right? Like being
100%.
authentic, right? Okay, so you see where I'm going. What's your advice for people trying to find that? How do you be yourself when you may not feel like it, you may not look like it, right? How do you find that thing that is authentically you if you're trying to build a brand off of it?
I think you got to get out of your own way. I
Hmm.
think you got to put yourself out into the world. And that is scary and that is challenging because there is no certain outcome. There is no definitive outcome of you putting yourself out there. Lean into, so listen, man, you talk about this book, Julia's book, The Artist's Way. I mean, this is probably one of those artistic, the art sort of mindset. But I tend to be of this mindset of when I can't figure this thing out, whatever it is that I'm trying to figure out, and I'm stuck. What I tend to do is I tend to put myself out into the world, and I sort of kind of give it to the world. I give it to the universe. I give it to God. I just give it away, right? So I don't sit here and just try to spend too much of my time trying to figure out myself. What I do is I get out of my space and I get into the space shared with the world. And that could be the space with people. That could be the space in a park where there's birds chirping, where there's dogs running around playing, where there's kids on the playground, and you just don't even see the kids, but you hear the laughter. Um, that could literally be, I mean, I travel, like a lot of people travel. Like I find myself in a city and I'll just go again. I love coffee. So I'll go and I'll sit down, grab a coffee, and I'll just sit somewhere and I'll just watch people, and I'll just have this curiosity about like, where is this dude going? Where's this dude coming from? Where is she going? Where's she coming from? Like, oh, I wonder what that life is like. I just put myself out into the world, and then over time, the world starts to give me the things that I need, the clarity, the understanding. It just gives me what I need. But I have to be willing to put myself in that space, and not just put myself in space and shut me off. I have to be willing to put myself in that space and be curious enough and pay attention to what's around me. I've never been one to necessarily really meditate, if you will, like sort of the traditional way that people talk about meditation. I'm more of a walking meditation guy. So I'm more of a like, hey, I'm going to go for a walk in the park. I'm going to go for a walk in the neighborhood. No AirPods, no podcast, no phone call scheduled, no music, no nothing. Just me, my brain, my eyes, and the environment around me. And I'm just going to connect, and I'm going to be present with that. And I'm going to see how pure and innocent this is, and how pure and innocent that is, and how beautiful this whole thing works. Despite what stage of life that I'm in right now, this is kind of a beautiful thing that I'm a part of, a very small part of it, but I'm still part of something bigger, this world. And you have to be willing at some point, if you are trying to figure out you, and it's for some reason you're overthinking it, because we do, then put yourself out there. Put yourself out. The world will tell you, but when they tell you, believe them. Believe them. So when they tell you that, hey, wow, that was powerful. Wow, this is your calling. Wow, you're great. Don't have imposter syndrome. Don't sit here and question it, doubt it. If it's enough people telling you enough things are happening, guess what? That's a pattern. You lean into that. The same thing goes if people are saying, man, we're not really vibing with that. We're not vibing with this. Okay, cool. Maybe now nobody's saying you got to change to be, for to be make everybody else happy, but maybe you factor in a little bit of the information. Maybe say, oh, maybe it's the way I'm delivering this thing. Maybe it's not what I'm saying, it's how I'm saying it. And so for me, get out of your own way and let the world give you what you need, because trust me, they will if you let them.
Before we go, I have to beg your finest pardon, my dear Gemini brother. You said that you don't really meditate, but I will remind you that earlier in this conversation, you were talking about when you were trapped in the Humvee and only hearing your breath and your thoughts. And then you also said, so I try to find my stillness if I'm outside picking up my kids in the car. That, my friend, is meditating. That's exactly what it is.
100%.
So,
100%.
and I was going to ask that question back then, but you've given me so much that I've got 1,000 questions I'll never get to. But that's exactly what it is. So,
Yeah.
in fairness, just to bat that ball back to you, that is meditating. It might
Yeah.
look different for different people, but you absolutely do. As I see it, you find your stillness. You take breaths. I mean, that's what it is. I think
Yeah.
sometimes and I try to do it. I'm no good at it, but I try to. What I've learned is myself and other people think it's something else, and it's not. It's taking
Yeah.
a second to close your eyes, connect with your thoughts, find your stillness, as you said, and connect with your body. So that's
Yeah.
exactly it.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Absolutely, absolutely, dude. This has been such a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. And all jokes aside, like I feel like we could just run and run and run with this. I love it so much, and I hope that we get the chance to do it again or in person, even
Yeah.
better. Before we go, what's got your motivation right now? What are the steps you're looking for 2025, 2026?
It's interesting, man. I'm in a really fun, cool space in my life right now where I don't know what's next. For a lot of people that freaks them out. For me, that's just sort of that's the opportunity of birthing something that's going to be special to me, whether it's special on a scale of monetization, whether it's special in the sense of like who connects with it. Maybe it's just me that I need it. What I mean by that is like, listen, I've been speaking for 2 decades now, and listen, I'm at a stage in my life. I got a 12-year-old daughter. I got a 3-year-old son. It's a very special time in their lives. And I'm selfishly want to be part of that as much as I can. I don't want to be on the road. I enjoy people. I enjoy conversation, but I don't want to be on the road, a couple hundred days out of the year in order
Yeah.
to, provide for my family. So I'm looking, what are some other opportunities? Do I want to get back into the entertainment industry? Because I went to school after dancing and all that stuff. I went to college, and I just kind of graduated a year ago. And so, or a year and a half ago, I was like, what do I want to do? Do I want to follow Rain and get into some podcasts and to see what that's all about? What is it? Do I want to write more? Is there a second book some things that I want to get out? I'm kind of in this really cool space right now where
Mhm.
there's no punctuation, there's no grammar. I'm just existing. I'm just being. I'm not overwhelming myself with what 6 months from now and 9 months from now or a year will look from now. I'm being present in this very moment. And the present is literally giving me the things that I need, and it's guiding me. And honestly, my friend, I got to tell you, like, we will stay connected. I will hit you up on Instagram. We will stay connected. I will be happily jump on again with you. When I'm in Raleigh, I'll definitely hit you up. When you're in Austin,
Please.
you definitely hit me up. But this conversation today, as organic as it was part of that process of helping me understand and giving me what I need.
I
So I
appreciate
thank
it.
you for the opportunity to not only connect with your audience, but also the opportunity and the gift that you gave me to realize that I should just stay the course because there's something I'm doing that is right. And this connection with people is essentially what I need to be seeking.
It's absolutely everything. I love that you said that too. Get out of your own way, get out of your own head, get out there in the world. I gives me chills right now thinking about it. It's so accurate. And absolutely, I got a 3-year-old son too. So I feel you on
Yeah,
that. I
yeah.
love that you're focused on the family, man. It's absolutely where our hearts and our heads should be. I believe
Yeah.
that fully. I got to say one thing before we go. I put my
Hmm.
storytelling nerd hat on. Your show is called Rebirth. This is the kind of the
Yeah.
theme of your platform.
Yeah.
So in stories, in typical like hero's journey stories, you have to go into, they call it the cave that you fear, like holds the treasure that you seek. You have to go into sometimes it's the belly of a whale, but it is some version of a dark cave. This is in classical hero's journey structure. You have to go in there. What does that represent? The womb. And you
Yeah.
have to be transformed and reborn in order to make the change that you need to overcome the obstacle, defeat the monster, whatever it is. So rebirth, like story is so inherent and ingrained in your blood, like that's what it calls. But for the hero, sorry, I get excited about this,
I was gonna
but for
say
the
you
hero,
really got that hat on right
the,
now.
the hero to overcome it, they literally go into a cave or something like that. Like I said, the belly of the beast, the belly of the whale, and they come out reborn with the tools to overcome the obstacle. That is a rebirth, and they have to go through the rebirth in order to do it.
Mhm.
So I think
Yep.
it's so beautiful and organic and kismic that you call your brand and your podcast that. And I just had to share that little bit of storytelling nerdiness with you.
Well, listen, man, if there's ever a moment that we're going to have to rebrand this thing and we're looking for a little, 2 or 3 lines, I may take that right there,
Come
and that'll
on,
be
yeah,
the
yeah.
that'll be the whole description of whatever it is that I'm doing. But if I can, and this is the last thing I say, and I know we're going to jump, but the last thing you said is you have to go through it in order to experience the birth. And I think that's, if anything, if all the rambling I did for the last hour, if anybody could take anything, it's just reminder that you have to go through it. You'll be okay. It'll be hard. I get it. But hard things are necessary, and there's value in those things. But go through it because there is a birth on the other side.
Yeah, you actually literally have to. Like there is
You
no
have
other
to.
other way around it. JR,
Yep.
thank you, my friend. This is, I mean, sincerely been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you, brother.
No, I appreciate you, my man. Best of luck in everything.
My name is Rain Bennett. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed that episode, do us a favor and subscribe to the podcast. If you're already a subscriber and you're enjoying the show, give us a review and let us know the value that you've gotten from it. We love to hear from our listeners and learn about the benefits that they're getting from the show. That's what fuels us, and that's what fuels the show. And if you've already subscribed and you've already reviewed it and you think there's someone else that would benefit from listening to this show, please share it with them. The more we grow, the more we can help you grow, and that's what we're here to do. Join us next time on the Storytelling Lab.